Hey, it's Sila Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to C-List Social Studies. All right, so we covered communism and Cuba. Now we have to cover communism and its effect or cause of the Vietnam War. So this area right here, we're going to go over the escalation into the Vietnam War. After World War II, Japan lost control of Vietnam, and France wound up becoming in control of Vietnam. Well, Vietnamese nationalists, that guy right there, Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh, fought against the French to control Vietnam. They wanted Vietnam to be back in the hands of the Vietnamese. Well, knowing that Ho Chi Minh was a communist sympathizer, Presidents Truman and Eisenhower really supported France with military aid to try to stop the spread of communism. Remember that containment, contain the spread of communism. Why? Because if the Viet Minh controlled Vietnam, then communism would spread throughout that part of Asia. Remember this whole domino theory? I've mentioned it a couple times before now. Once one country falls to communism, then the surrounding countries will fall as well. And that's actually a very good cartoon there in the middle of your screen. You see right there, there's the USSR with the finger, and he's pointing at the countries. You see these domino looking things where the countries has a shape and the name on the side, and it says Laos, Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea. And the idea was if one of those countries fell to communism, then the others would as well, and communism would just spread. Remember, we're trying to contain communism. So in July of 1954, France and Vietnam agreed to the Geneva Accords. And what this does, it's a 2-year agreement which divides Vietnam at the 17th parallel into North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And the idea was to have, in 2 years from there, a democratic election which would decide the government for both of the Vietnams, if that makes sense, for North and South Vietnam, that they would reunite under one government. Well, that wasn't going to work out because why? Because Ho Chi Minh was a communist. So Ho Chi Minh led northern Vietnam, North Vietnam. And that was the communists. You see right there, the picture on the right-hand side, there's the red Vietnam, which is, remember red, the Red Scare, the idea for communism with the yellow star. And what Ho Chi Minh did was he really forced the French out of North Vietnam. And he did it with his land distribution plan. And basically what the idea was is he would take the land from those French nationalists, those wealthy European French people, and he would take that land and redistribute it to the poor Vietnamese. That's the idea behind communism. Equal land distribution. All right, so this, thousands of these French nationalists were killed or imprisoned during this point in time. That's kind of what the communist government did. So it funded and supplied communist guerrilla forces called the Viet Cong in South Vietnam against their, for their National Liberation Front. The idea was this, that the northern Vietnamese Viet Cong is trying to go to South Vietnam and unify it, to liberate it, right? So it's called the National Liberation Front. They're trying to liberate South Vietnam and incorporate it into the one Vietnam. What the idea behind Ho Chi Minh and northern Vietnam is, hey, everybody in Vietnam, North and South Vietnam, want to be a part of communist North Vietnam. So we're going to go ahead and liberate South Vietnam. So that's the idea behind Ho Chi Minh and the communist North Vietnamese. And you will see that these Viet Cong come up again during the war because these are the northern Vietnamese that are fighting in the war. What happens in South Vietnam? Well, the United States supports South Vietnam, and we're running South Vietnam with a Western-style government who's led by this gentleman right there, No Dinh Diem. Diem was very corrupt. He had very poor leadership skills, and this resulted in many problems in the southern Vietnamese government. And because of this failure of a Western-style government, a lot of the South Vietnamese started to sympathize with and support Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh to try to liberate South Vietnam. Well, Diem feared this election loss, and he even refused to allow South Vietnam to have any type of Western-style elections, which is really a staple in the Western-style government, right? We're a popular sovereignty. We're allowed to vote our leaders in. Well, Diem was like, no, I don't think so. So once you do that, you kind of turn into like a dictator, right? So you turn into a communist dictator, sort of. And Diem's opponents from this National Liberation Front began fighting against Diem and his government in the 1950s. Well, you have to remember, the United States and France were supporting South Vietnam. So Eisenhower and Kennedy send what we call military advisors and special forces to South Vietnam. We're not at war yet. We're not fighting the North Vietnamese. We're sending these advisors in. So the military is accompanying the South Vietnamese on combat missions, but we're not at war yet. And in 1963, about 16,000 U.S. military personnel are serving in Vietnam. This is not the full-fledged Vietnam War that we know. We are starting off this war very, very slowly. This whole group of advisors to go in there and help aid and help train the South Vietnamese army. So this is not war yet. Diem becomes more and more unpopular with the people. That's a picture right there on the cover of Time magazines. He wouldn't hold elections. He ordered his troops to fire on Buddhist demonstrators, which is a big no-no in South Vietnam. And his opponents began to consider violence as the only option to go against Diem, and they do. In November of '63, a group of South Vietnamese officers seized power and killed Diem, and that's it for Diem's Western-style type government. So this winds up becoming like the last straw type thing, right? We have advisors in, we have military in. The Southern Vietnamese just killed their quote-unquote president of South Vietnam because of his corruptness. And you have Southern sympathizers who want to join communist North Vietnam. You have the United States who doesn't want the spread of communism. This is just throwing fuel on that fire of containment. And this will eventually lead us into the Vietnam War.